Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's lovely to see so many faces, and this promises to be a pretty great session, I think. I was just saying to some of the others who joined slightly early that you are guaranteed to learn something, because some of this is also subjective, so it will be impossible not to learn something, even if it's about someone. So great to have everyone. But first of all, very happy International Women's History Month. Really glad to be putting on this panel to celebrate, well, initially International Women's Day. Didn't realize it was a whole month, so that makes it even better. And very grateful to all of you for coming, and especially our panelists, who are Alexis, Vess, Mamie, and Susan from our very own team, and also special guest Christina, who's the talent partner over at Blossom and has been kind enough to join us today. And I do believe you'll meet Christina in Lisbon as well. We're just resolving details there, so you'll see her again very soon. Thanks, Christina, for joining. It is great to have you. So on the agenda for today, we'll start off with a few facts and figures from the World Economic Forum's most recent gender gap report, just to give some context. We'll then hand over to Alexis, who will talk about imposter syndrome and women in male-dominated industries. Then over to Vess, who will talk about what the future of leadership looks like and taking control of your own narrative. On to Mamie, who will talk about career progression, so how to get the role that you want or how to excel in the role that you have. Susan will then share about empowerment in regards to mentorships and support networks. And then over to our special guest, Christina, who will talk about how to find your voice. We've had quite a lot of pre-submitted questions that I will put to the panelists either after their sections or at the end. But if you do have any questions that crop up in the meantime, don't be afraid to put them in the chat, and we'll try and reserve some time to go through those at the end if we can. So first, a few facts and figures. If you think you might know the answer, just yell it out or pop it in the chat. The first one is, what percentage of the global workforce do women account for? Any ideas? No judgment for wrong answers.
50%?
That is a very reasonable guess, slightly lower at 42%. So yeah, Amit, you were the closest actually. Then what is the proportion of women in senior leadership roles? 15%, 28%. Yeah, pretty low guesses there. Actually, 32%, which is higher than I expected, but lower than I would like. What is the proportion of women in C-suite leadership roles? Seeing some guesses, 1%, 2%. Again, I think this one is higher. Yeah, 28%. Fairly surprising news, but some more context on that later. This is also impacted by other demographics as well. So there's an important intersection here between different demographics. So you can see of the 28% of women that make up C-suite roles, only 6% of those women are women of color. So another interesting intersection to consider there. And how many countries worldwide have achieved full gender parity? Any guesses? 23. One from Pablo. Yeah, Pablo, you are certainly the closest because the answer is 0. Oh, Ernie got there. The answer is 0. And in fact, Iceland is the only country to reach 90%. So yeah. Then we have finally, since 2015, the proportion of women appointed to leadership positions has been steadily increasing by how much annually? Any guesses? 10% from Amit, 25% from Mamie. It is sadly significantly lower at 1%, but after today's session, maybe 1.01%. We'll see how it goes. With that, I will get stuck into our panelist talks. And first up, we've got Alexis. So over to you, Alexis.
Well, thanks. Wow, I'm excited to have to fit the time limit and be the first one going. So a lot of pressure. I'm super delighted to be talking about imposter syndrome. Anybody who's known me for a while knows that I love behavioral psychology. I love neurobiology and anything to do with the brain. So we wanted to kick off with, well, what's real and what's in your head? Quick definition, because imposter syndrome is I think we've all heard about it right now. It's not an uncommon term, but just very generally, it is a psychological phenomenon that means that a person may doubt their talent, skills, or accomplishments, internalizing as feeling that they're a fraud in their own space. And imposter syndrome, we're talking about it in the context of women today, but it is a genuine phenomenon and it is based in your neurobiology. Your brain is very lazy and your brain is going to try and make as few decisions and use as much energy. It's the most energy intense organ in your entire body. And so imposter syndrome is based on what you see yourself and what others see, which is I don't see a lot of people, as we just saw in the stats from Robin, that look like you who do your role. And you internalize that from a very young age. Women in particular are socialized to please and to be perfect, which is a pretty difficult standard. So taking those two factors in where I don't actually see a lot of people who look like you who do that. So maybe I need to be careful. And then I have a high achievement standard for myself means that you come into a natural psychological situation where you doubt a lot whether you are good enough. Women in male-dominated industries obviously are going to experience this more than others because everywhere around you, what you're going to see is you're going to see people that don't look like you who are in charge, who are making other decisions. And change is actually really hard. So I wanted to focus a lot of this on like, well, navigate to success. What are things you can do and what are things that you can't do? First of all, what's real is that it is really difficult. You can't have change without loss. And when we talked about the different types of discrepancies and how we're focusing on women today, there's a lot of work to get to parity. I believe it was the UN did research that it would take 300 years at the current rate for women and men to be equal. So Iceland, kudos to you, you're gone well and above. And that is because you have to there is always loss in change. And so you need to be in a system where you have people who are aware and encouraging. So be aware of what you can control and what you can't control. First, I always think of what you can control, what you can influence, and then the vast majority of everything else, which you cannot control or influence. I'll give us an example that happened recently where I was speaking with somebody in a mentorship fashion, and they had a great idea. This was a woman, and I asked that person, "Oh well, what did your team think when you suggested that?" And they're like, "Oh well, I'm just waiting. I'm just going to wait and see, and make sure that I'm just going to make sure that it's correct before I ask it." There are so many times that women self-edit when you can step forward. That is keeping it short and simple in terms of things that are actionable is just if you are not even aware of the pattern, you can't change it. The second part would be around you in the environment. It's the same ask for all of our colleagues here. How can I make an environment that is nurturing and inclusive? And it's becoming aware yourself because you also have those same biases. They have actually done research. You actually are expecting women to do more in order for them to be successful. There was a very interesting research where the housework that gets done in offices, both women and men expect women to do it. So those are things that are self-awareness that you can cultivate for yourself, or better yet, eliminate those kinds of assumptions. Have a rotation or plan so that it's not something that you need to think about because your brain is going to take the shortcut every time. And again, it's not personal. We're all here with an inclusive and we want to be good to each other. Just take those measures so that you can eliminate those risks. I hope I was in 5, but yes, exactly. All right. Over to you, Robin.
I was going to say perfect timing and didn't realize we had a resident neuropsychologist. So that's an awesome perspective,
I think
Alexis.
we have a lot of people who enjoy the subject.
Yeah, very interesting. So we have a couple questions that were pre-submitted. So the first one is, what are some common challenges that women may face in the workplace or the industry that their male counterparts may not be aware of?
I think I like to focus on those things that you can't control. And we talk about this a lot in terms of hiring and how having a set process eliminates a lot of these biases. Because if you don't have set criteria about how you're judging people, your brain is going to immediately go on default. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. You're just human. That's how all humans are going to behave. And so making sure that you're not being like, no, I didn't really get on with that person. No, or I have this gut feel. Sometimes your gut feel is really good, but most of the time, if your gut feel isn't based on like 10 plus 20 years of experience, it's probably, even then, might be deviating.
Exactly. Yeah, that's called unconscious bias for a reason. Hey, people
Yeah.
aren't doing it to be intentionally evil, but these things do crop up. So yeah, great point. And then we have one, this one's from Ariana. So what steps can an organization take on an organizational level to address those feelings of imposter syndrome and promote confidence amongst their employees?
There, I saw that one. There's a couple things you can do. One is making it an agenda point to make sure that everybody in the room talks. And again, you can say that that's some people don't like to talk or don't, and make sure that you're rotating and that it's not just you're always having the jokes with the favorite person or the person you get on the most with. Even if it's a friendly joke, like joke, pick on everybody if that's the way that you like to operate. The other one is imposter syndrome. People are going to self-edit. And so making sure that your criteria for good are clear and what is your, and we all usually have a list of like what we'd ideally like to have. And then the what we must have looks like this. Try and help people to understand what the must haves are and what the great to have afterwards so that that barrier to self-editing maybe is smaller.
Yeah, great point. And I guess also to think about why the must-haves are must-haves as well is another
Yeah,
interesting area. But
it's hard.
thank you so much, Alexis. Super interesting to hear from that perspective. I'm gonna hand over now to Vess to talk about the future of leadership and crafting your own narrative.
Thanks, Robin. So yeah, I'm gonna start actually with the narrative because when we started talking about this, women in leadership panel, I think the first thing that came to mind was actually, why we attach the word female to so many other words, which typically are kind of, male dominated, whether it's, leaders or doctors or lawyers or whatever you might have it. And of course, I started thinking about, what has helped me to become, somewhat of a leader. I think I'm still a budding one, definitely not the Sheryl Sandberg type, but hopefully on the way there. So yeah, I thought about, basically, I've never thought about this kind of, female leaders or female executives or anything female. And I always thought about my work as kind of what's the value that I'm bringing? Like, what is the impact that I'm going to drive? And for those of you who know my career or my kind of path in general, I've started into international relations, moved on to marketing, and then went into tech and like strategy and ops. I think the common thread there is that I was always curious to learn kind of new things, whether this was about obviously the world and how it works, or storytelling, or problem solving, and data analytics and leadership and all these things. And at different points, I always kind of felt like, oh, I need to like know something really, really well in order for me to be able to apply myself to the world in a meaningful way. And so for me, that thing of being female was never a thing in my professional kind of life. And then, of course, that's a baseline, but then you experience your first exception. And kind of a quick story, which I think I have told the leadership team of Theydo, so they know this. But one day, basically, being female was presented to me as a problem. This was the first time when I, sitting with somebody, I realized that, oh, actually, the fact that I just happened to be born in this body is not taken very well. And this was the day when I had kind of in a previous role where I had been for many years, literally had, somebody who had been there for 2 months, sit me down in a small room, to have an informal coffee chat, as we used to call it. And basically say to me, hey, Vess, like, you need to learn to be a girl. Like, you need to learn to sit down and listen. And that was very, very striking to me. Like, that was before the whole Me Too movement, before any of that was, being talked about. And what did I do? I just laughed. because I thought that he's joking. I was like, this must be a joke, clearly. But it wasn't. And he was just dead serious. And that's when I thought, okay, I'll hold my French here, but like, I'm in trouble. It's like, if this is how we're thinking about this. And probably this wasn't the first time when, I have been kind of demeaned or ignored or let down in some shape or form because I'm, a woman. But then you actually start seeing it in certain situations where you might be leading a project and somebody from the other end of the room will say, hey, who's the young chick? And it's like, oh, the young chick is actually the one who's leading the whole bloody thing. Or in situations where you have, somebody, say something which gets ignored, and then you have to almost shout at the top of your lungs to actually have it heard. So I had all these different situations. But I think in dealing with that, and this is why to me it's very important to actually start taking control of your own narrative, is like this will come from a lot of different people. This is not just men or women. Like this is, everybody can make you feel that way. And they can make a snap judgment about you. They can ignore you, go behind your back, and they will do this, and people will still do this. But you need to kind of make it clear that they're doing it at their own expense. And so you can control obviously what people's biases or preconceptions are, but you control your work. And this is where I think once I realized that, for me, this was quite massive, because you practically, when you control your work, you control your narrative. Like you don't wait for people to tell you kind of who you are. You need to show them, one, like, why are you here? i.e., what drives you? What's your purpose? What do you want to get out of this? Even if it's a meeting, or even if it's, I don't know, a job or whatever it is, like, why are you here? And then you need to kind of say, okay, what do you bring to the table? Like, what is your key kind of thing that, a lot of people call it like a spike or whatever it is, but you come prepared. You come with, your homework. Is it an analysis, a skill, a data point, or some history or some research that you've done? Like, what do you bring to the table? And the third thing is like, how do you drive impact? So you link basically kind of how you can come and expand the pie for the whole company or the whole organization or the whole department, whatever it is. Like you link your work to the goals of that company or department or team, and you show your impact. And this to me has been very, very powerful, really kind of coming in, showing up for yourself and for your work, taking pride into it, and then really, getting out of life what you put in a way. Like you just have to go and do some great work and surround yourself with the fans that you accumulate along the way, basically. So this is it. This is the short story.
Thank you, Vess. Yeah, an interesting one. I think you also just answered the previous question as well that I put to Alexis about some challenges that women face in the workplace that male counterparts may not be aware of. If you're not the type of person to say things like that, then you might not expect that others would, but it's probably something that a fair few women can resonate with, is stories like that. A couple of questions for you as well. So the first is, how do you balance advocating for yourself whilst also building supportive relationships within your industry?
So it's an interesting way that question is asked, actually, because to me, those two are not mutually exclusive. So advocating for yourself, and I think, again, like really coming in and showing your work and showing who you are and showing what you stand for, should not come at the expense of, good relationships. I think, if anything, it's the backbone of good relationships. I think some of you will know that I write a lot about strategy and Biz Ops in general and kind of leadership. It's something that I'm passionate about. And I think that kind of doing this and really fleshing it out, like what it is and what it means to me and kind of what I can, give to the world in that domain, has helped me actually create a lot of these supportive networks, whether it's even, just the Theydo for the, small Biz Ops department that we have, or even, branching out, in London and like being a part of a lot of other communities where people will ask for advice and they'll just want, some sort of, guidance or mentorship. So I'll write and I'll mentor and I'll try to pay it back. And I think this is kind of the best way to build relationships where you kind of give before you expect to get anything out of them. It's, I don't know, I think some people call it karma, but I think a lot of the time when people see that you're useful, they'll just keep coming back to you. And I think this is probably one of the best kind of rewards for me in a lot of different ways, where people come and start asking me like more and more questions. And that's when I know that, oh, this has resonated and I can really show more of, what I think or how I do, and you kind of expand that kind of circle of influence that you have.
Exactly. Nice. Great to know. And then a Theydo specific one. Any ideas about what the future of leadership at Theydo might look like?
So I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what it looks like, but I can tell you what I want it to look like. So I think that will be hopefully enough. I think one thing I want us to do as a leadership team first, I think, and then of course as a whole company, is to build a muscle for genuine listening. And that means that we root our work and our opinions in solid data. So some of you have heard me talk about, Biz Ops and what we did in the first year, where we said we are basically building the plumbing of, data and flows and processes and all this, so that we can actually start learning. We can actually start like driving real strategy. This is what we need to start doing. And I still believe that this will be kind of also a backbone for leadership, regardless of what sex you might be. This is where, what is being said is more important than who says it, because obviously in the early stages it's very easy for you to just attach a person to a message, and then the message becomes the person, where we want actually the message to be something which comes from an analysis. So yeah, I think hopefully we'll do this, and we'll do this obviously consistently and with enough repeatability and enough rigor. And obviously I have a role to play there, and I hope that I can obviously assist us in achieving this. It's probably one of my biggest missions, at least that they do. And I think the other thing is I want us to appreciate different styles of leadership. So obviously we have a company which is started in the Netherlands. What we're going to be becoming more and more global, more and more diverse, whether we like it or not. And so I think having the understanding that people should play to their own strengths, and they might have a different way of expressing themselves, just makes them better and more interesting leaders, rather than kind of a cookie cutter of what somebody's expectation might be about what a leader, quote unquote, should look like or behave like. So those are my kind of two hopes for the future, and I will try to do my best to make them happen.
Nice. Well, it sounds fantastic. You've set yourself up with a pretty big task there, but yeah, looking forward to it. Awesome. All right. Now handing over to Memie to tell us more about career progression.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. I feel really honored to be able to speak on my experience alongside these great women on this panel. And Beth, I think that that vision that you have is something that I think we all can collectively work towards, and hopefully it's not just on your shoulders. So love that vision for us. Yeah, I would love to speak of actually kind of on a personal experience of what it's like to actually transition into a leadership role for the first time in a really formal setting. So to show a little bit of vulnerability, joining Theydo was the first time that I found myself in a role where I was really supporting other people to do their best work and to create the environment for us to build a design organization. And so I think I've been reflecting a lot on the ways that I prepared for this, or to identify like if this was the path that I wanted to take. And I think a lot of it comes down to, I think, my internal core of being very rooted in user research. Like I come from a UX background and deeply care about like learning from other people and taking other people's experiences to understand like what to take from that. And I did a lot of that as I was kind of looking ahead at what was next in my career. I kind of always knew that I wanted to support other people, to step into leadership roles, to kind of shift focus slightly adjacent to product, but not always within product. And so I just started to talk to a lot of people around what this role kind of looked like, and try to identify the various tactical things that people did, the qualitative traits that people had. And as I was trying to prep myself to search for this type of role, I was looking at what are all the examples of things that I was already practicing these things. I think when you're in a position of transitioning into management or leadership, it's really hard sometimes to advocate or showcase things that you've done before to prepare you for that role, because you've never had it. And so I think that was a really interesting moment of just like internally recognizing that even though I've never had the title, there's been a lot of examples of those skill sets being practiced. And so encourage everyone as you think about what might not be next ahead to, maybe change or encourage your internal voice to kind of reframe. And, now that I have gotten the role, I think one of the key things that was really important to me was this idea of building out kind of a personal advisory board. And how this has translated is, admittedly, a lot of the things that I'm doing now and will be doing in the upcoming years will be things that I'm doing for the first time. And I want to pull from a network of, right now, my personal advisory board is a lot of women who have been in this position in the past, and with the different types of perspectives and different types of skill sets. I have a close friend who is very knowledgeable within the AI space right now. So anytime that, I want to learn more about that, or maybe when we take on more projects with Journey AI, to kind of pull from her expertise to say, how did you navigate these types of problems? How did you approach like balancing these different types of questions? And the same is true with, whenever I feel like I'm facing issues with supporting maybe someone on the team, I know exactly the person I go to kind of ask about their experience. Can we kind of walk through how you would navigate the situation? And I think the more that we can create a network of people around us that have had these experiences and can share them and talk through them, the better we are to kind of take those on ourselves. Even if it doesn't turn out well, you kind of have the learnings of all the great people around you to kind of build off of. And it makes it a little less isolating, a little less intimidating to be able to kind of take on these brand new things for the first time. So find your champions, find the people that can support you in a lot of these new and scary environments, and you'll be in a much better place.
Nice. Lovely, Memie. I love the notion that just because leadership is a new part of your job title, it's not a new part of your skill set, whether it's leading initiatives or projects or friends, family, whatever it is, it's something that usually exists within your realm at some point before you get to that stage. So a couple questions for you. First of all, do you have any examples of how your own personal advisory board has provided you some guidance or support during a challenging time or a new opportunity?
Yeah, that's a really good one. But part of me actually developing like this idea of a personal advisory board came from the woman that stepped into the head of design role at Miro. We had been searching for one for a really long time, and she had only joined the company just a couple of months before I left. And so I actually spent quite a bit of time with her as I was offboarding to understand, of course, different scale. Miro is much larger, but as someone of her level, to have stepped into a new organization with a lot of established practice, with a lot of people that she was now kind of responsible for, with a lot of initiatives already going, that was something I think that I was really nervous to step into, of coming to Theydo with design already being such a strong practice, with people who have been working within the design space for so long. How do I actually embed myself into that? What's important for me to pay attention to? What are the things that I actually shouldn't be doing in the first 3 to 6 months? And so kind of that was a turning point for me to be like, that's where she kind of advised me to find people that could help with all of those different questions that I had. And she shared a lot of her experience of what she was going through at Miro at the time at a much larger scale. And I think that was really helpful in kind of relieving some of the pressure that I internally built within myself of being able to join Theydo and, support the team here.
Yeah, nice. Vulnerability is a key to that, as you said when you opened as well. So that's great to hear. And then another one, I wonder if there's anything that you can do, and you've kind of touched on this already with saying that your board is diverse in their skill sets and backgrounds and stuff. Is there anything else you should do to ensure that your personal advisory board is not just an echo chamber?
Yeah, I actually have like one of my like past colleagues that I felt like oftentimes we had really differing opinions on things. And I think like when I hear echo chamber, I kind of hear, or how that translates for me is like someone who may not be willing to be very direct and truthful, of wanting to like really only stay positive and kind of reaffirm things that you're going through. And I always think it's really important to make sure there is like a reality check, or someone who is like comfortable and confident to be like, hey, no, you're too deep in this, or you are thinking about this incorrectly, like you are too self-motivated in this way when trying to tackle this problem. I haven't had that conversation with her yet, but I definitely purposefully asked her if she'd be willing to meet on a regular basis because of that. Because I know that, you know, when you talk to people who you're really close with, you build these relationships, and you don't want to like necessarily hurt each other's feelings. But part of what's important is that in tough situations, things aren't always going to be going well. And so having someone who you can trust to give you an honest perspective around this, I think is a really important trait to have in this group of people.
Nice. Yeah, sounds like a great shout to solve that one. It's all well and good to have a lovely support network, but I guess support also includes being realistic or honest and straightforward. So great shout. Pretty good idea,
Yeah.
I think. Thanks, Mamie.
Thanks so much.
Over now to Susan.
Thank you, everyone, and some great talks here. So I think I've heard some good things along the way. I'm going to weave in a little bit into my part, which is around mentorships and support networks. And maybe I'll just kind of start with my trajectory through mentorship and empowerment, and it might shed some light along the way. So, you know, I worked at a company for 6 years with a woman CEO, and she was amazing. She wasn't somebody that took you under her wing and mentored, like man or woman. She did her job, but she did an amazing job. And I learned a lot by watching, right? By watching and doing and emulating. And I want to bring that to people's attention, because a lot of times you can do that just by the people around you. And I was very fortunate to have that piece. To steal a little bit of what Alexis said, I think I became my best edited version of a woman, you know, like I with the slide decks and so on, and points of view around numbers and so on, but it certainly helped raise me up. Then when I went to my next company, which actually I worked with the same executive leadership at both companies, had a male CEO, but under him were the women executives, the CMO, the chief of product. You know, I reported up into them. And I think that's where I learned through their mentorship. And again, just watching, to be more of my authentic self. So I'll give you a live example. Like the woman that was the CMO again, that I worked with at both companies, where I had seen more of the edited, like professional version before, she was more just her authentic self, like out there telling funny stories about her family, self-deprecating about her age in front of everyone. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, can a woman do that? But at the same time, you know, she had amazing executive presence. She had high expectations for people, and she supported you along the way. And my biggest learning was when people saw how confident she was with her authentic self, they followed her. And again, followed her to 2 jobs. There's like 10 of us that followed her to 2 jobs, men and women. So, you know, they followed her because they felt comfortable being themselves. And I think it was a really important lesson. It has to be done the right way. I still can't be as out there as she is, but I will tell you, she's actually one of my best friends now. And I think the other thing too is mentorship what I saw the way she mentored that's helped me mentor is you can sit down and you can have conversations and talks and feedback, but she always did it real time. And one of the best things she did to me, Alexis, I'm going to go back to your unedited and edited example, was we'd be sitting in a meeting and she wouldn't say any comments, anything. She would go, Susan, what's your point of view? And so you got to come out with it, right? And you could still edit real time, but she's like, what's your point of view? What's your point of view? Why do you think that? And I think that was super helpful for me and my growth along the way. So yes. And as I move into, I'm looking at time here. So I think that I'll just kind of summarize that with a lot of my mentors, I feel I was very fortunate, but just watching people and then also taking from them what works best for yourself, going back to your authentic self, right? You can take bits and pieces from different women leaders that work for you, but if something doesn't work for you and their style is different, don't try to be that, because that won't work for you, right? So embrace what works for you best. So then going into support networks, you'll probably notice my stories before that, or maybe you didn't notice, but I operate better in small groups, or just what had happened to me along the way. I didn't always go to a lot of support networks or large group situations. But I did find one. Unfortunately, it was in California, a professional business women's group, and I'm happy to send the link because they still do great work, which I found was really helpful. And I went there with a colleague, kind of spur of the moment. I didn't have a ticket. I was like, ooh, Moscone Convention Center, that's huge. That's not my thing. But they do a great job with leaders, not only women leaders in tech, but they also do the first one I went to, they had a woman there from India who spoke how she and her women were starting a business and they couldn't get loans. And so the work they had to do, and when they found out how hard it was for women to get loans in India, they started a new business that helped women get loans, not even the original business. So it's just a great network for any type of businesswoman, and it's great international focus, which is why I bring that up. Additionally, I would say ERG groups, right? Enterprise resource groups within companies. Asana had a great one. It's a safe space for people to talk about what might be coming up for them and where they need, assistance, and just, again, a psychologically safe space. So I will leave it there on my 5 minutes.
Awesome, Susan. Thank you. The one of the takeaways I get from what you've been talking about, and a little of what the others have spoken about as well, is that maybe self-editing is a task, an additional task that could be better spent doing something else, a little more constructive, maybe. So very good to know. And a couple of questions for you as well. The first being, are there any particular qualities that you would suggest somebody looks for in a mentor or a support network?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit what I've said is find the mentors that work for you. We all have different styles, regardless, we all have different styles. So I think it's looking for what works for you, looking for people that have a strength on an area where you're trying to work, and bring that together. But I think that's the most important. There's a lot out there, but if you're there and you're like, that's not my style, I can't see myself doing that, go to the next one. Find the one where you feel like it's your best self. You can bring out your best self.
Yeah, great point. Good point. And then another one is, are there any really common barriers to empowerment in the workplace, and how can they be overcome?
I think it's a good question. I think I've been fortunate to not run into like a lot of barriers that way, but I do think it goes back to what we spoke about originally. Just, are you finding yourself stepping back? Are you your own? I almost look at, for me, am I being my own barrier? I know that's kind of changing the question, but am I my own barrier to empowerment, right? And that's probably where I start. And then I try to answer that question honestly for myself. And then if I'm not my own barrier, then what are the barriers? What are you seeing? I think that's where the ERG groups are really important. Again, Asana had great enterprise resource groups for each company where you can go and you can bring that in a safe space and then talk about it there. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, definitely agree. That's maybe the first thing that comes to mind for me is that you may well be your own biggest barrier, and if it is something external, then you might be able to do more than you think to dismantle it or overcome it yourself. So yeah, very valid point. Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Now handing over to our guest Christina to tell us more about how to find your voice.
Thank you, Robin. Hi, I'm Christina. I am talent partner at Blossom, one of the investors lucky to be part of your journey. Before Blossom, I was actually also a co-founder myself at a venture-backed tech company who developed work management software. And more recently, I was a chief people officer at online identity verification company called Verif, where we grew the team from 50 to 700. And I suppose one topic that has always kind of been in the back of my mind or kind of followed me throughout my career is how do I find and how do I stick to my own voice? So that's what I want to cover here briefly. I'm hoping to keep it quite short and sweet and kind of filled with some practical advice that I hope you can use. So maybe let's start with you first. So you as a human being, what are your kind of personal boundaries that help you to perform your best work? So what do you need to be successful? So to give you an example, for me, those boundaries are learned the hard way. I don't work evenings and weekends. That means that I don't take any routine meetings. I don't have any Slack notifications, and all my work emails are filtered out. So I need to do that in order to come to work the next day. And kind of find creative solutions to hard problems, right? And I need to give my head some rest. Those boundaries obviously do not apply when there is an emergency in the business and the company needs me to act fast or do something. And all my colleagues have always known if this situation occurs, they give me a call. But I'm not just always online in case something like that happens. And to be honest, this has always been very much respected by the people that I work with. But I think the tricky part is that making sure that you yourself respect it as well. And I think self-discipline is super important here. And maybe to motivate you to keep that self-discipline is that if you let it slip, people start kind of change their expectations towards you. So an example, once you start like accepting maybe a few meetings at 9 p.m., I mean, people start expecting that that's normal and that's what you do. So I think key here is, how do you kind of keep yourself accountable to your own boundaries? Then the second point is, how do you want to lead? What do you want to be known for as a leader to your own team? And it might be helpful to kind of establish a couple of mantras for yourself. So for me, it has been service leadership. So I am here for my team to remove blockers so that they can perform their best work. And then leading by example, which means that when we propose new routines or new agreements, how we do things, it can be as simple as kind of posting your weekly highs and lows to a team Slack channels every Friday. But if we do agree to that, I have to be the first one doing it. Otherwise, how can I expect my team to follow those agreements if I don't follow it myself? And I think a good way maybe to kind of establish those mantras, and I think Susan said it as well, is sometimes to observe other leaders that you respect, to see what they do and how they get those good results. And maybe sometimes also to think about people maybe that you haven't respected that much or that things that they have not gone quite right, and then try to learn from there. But I think key here is consistency, right? So if you do establish the ways of leading your team, you have to kind of stick to them, because this really helps to build trust between yourself and your team members, because they know what they can expect from you as a leader. And I think the third part is kind of your voice to the organization, and that I mean quite literally. So what are the things that you are willing to kind of stand up to? Stand up for? So what are the unique points that you are qualified to, I suppose, defend or protect? So, and this comes quite a lot from your unique position in the organization, right? So it can be design thinking, it can be customer centricity, it can be people first. But what is it that that kind of wants you to make something better, and then kind of make sure that this point is taken into consideration? And I suppose how to do this, and this is maybe as an umbrella throughout those 3 points, is what is the why? What is the why in all of those things? So if you need to kind of defend your boundaries, you need to kind of explain why your leadership style is the best for the company, or you need to stand up for certain parts of the business. So why do you do this? Why is it important for the business at that point? And maybe to find that why or to validate it, it's good to kind of run the 5 whys kind of test. So you kind of ask why 5 times after every answer you give yourself, just to make sure that you can really kind of stand by your arguments. So I think to sum it up, I think one thing is kind of consistency and self-discipline is very, very important. And the other thing is explain the why behind your approach and why is it best for the business. I think that's it.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Christina. I love that the why in your voice is the thing that underpins all 3 of those, and that you brought up that rest and taking care of yourself is highly productive. It's a really constructive thing to do. So I love that. A couple of questions for you as well. So this one is from Ariana, and she'd love to know if you can think of a specific time or a situation when you felt that your voice was not being heard or valued, and how did you go about navigating that situation?
Sure. Okay, I have kind of 3 parts. I really love the number 3 for some reason. I had 3-part answer to that. So I think the first part is that, yes, a couple of years ago, I knew that we need to start running a big kind of cross-company project. So I thought I'll get a head start. I prepped everything. So timelines, goals, kind of trade-offs, execution plans, everything. And then presented this to my kind of co-leadership team members. And they completely ignored it. They were like I didn't get any feedback. So at the time I felt quite hurt. I was like, I put all those hours in. I thought this the best approach is the people-centric approach. We should do this. But to be honest, how I overcame it at that point is I pulled back. I was like, I just left it be. I didn't talk about it anymore. I didn't push that agenda. I just let it sit there. And at that point it worked, because in about a month's time, the team actually came back to me and said, okay, let's now do this. But because for the others in the team, it wasn't top of their agenda, they had other business priorities. So they're it wasn't as high up. So at that point, literally pulling back and giving people some space, it worked. And I think as a one-off, this could work. Now, when you see that there is, it kind of comes up and again with kind of same people that you felt that you're not being heard. I think that's the point where you actually have to kind of talk to them and explain how does it make you feel, and try to understand why it's happening. And if people change their behavior, obviously, then it's all good. But I think the third element is that when you see it's systematic, it's constant, you've given feedback, nothing changes, I think that's the point where it kind of hard cold truth is you really need to assess is you're probably not going to change the personality. Are you going to make it work for yourself, knowing that this is a point where your voice may not be heard at all? If yes, okay. If no, then maybe it's time to move on.
Yeah, great advice. I love the logical approach to that. That's fantastic. We have another question, and this one's from Joachim, and it's a bit more broad.
Go for it.
This one is about how we touched on it earlier as well when we looked at the statistics with women in C-suite roles and women of color in C-suite roles. What else do you think is important in terms of defining diversity? Any other particular points that come to mind?
Oh, diversity, yes. I think, well, of course, diversity is so much more than just race, gender, sexual orientation. I mean, it's about neurodiversity. It's about different kind of cultural backgrounds that we have. It's different kind of skills, experiences. So I think in terms of kind of defining it, I think you should probably define it for your company. What are the elements of diversity that you kind of prioritize first? And if you've kind of defined those, then how are you going to drive that? So what are kind of the targets that you set for yourself that you're going to drive kind of diversity, building up your team? Because obviously, if you don't set those kind of targets, and I know kind of setting quotas, it's not a very kind of, I suppose, nice term, but if you don't set any targets for yourself, especially if you're a fast-growing company who like agility is everything, you need to hire fast, you need to kind of build fast, you need to do everything fast. Those targets, if you don't have targets, then those diversity kind of goals that you have, they're very easy to slip because everything else, speed takes priority. But if you do have targets, it's easier to stick to that. But from my personal viewpoint, diversity is only the beginning. So I think it's kind of the other elements of DEIB, especially the belonging element, is like, can everyone actually bring their true self to work, and can they kind of explain and express those diverse viewpoints? I think it's very important. And I know we're kind of for the sake of time, but if anyone wants, then there's by Verna Mayers, there's a pretty good analogy, DEIB at a dance party. So you can Google this kind of explains it pretty well.
Nice. We'll most definitely be doing that. Nice to hear that you have a very similar ethos to our DEIB committee. So I hope everyone's taking notes, because that's part of our voice for the company here. So we'll make sure to discuss that one next time. Thank you, Christina. Now, if anyone does have any additional questions that they want to drop in the chat, we should have a couple of minutes to get to them. I do have some more pre-submitted questions here that panelists, feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts on any of them. But I'm going to start by directing the first one to Alexis. I know you were interested in this topic. A question from Bastian, which I love, which is, how can I, as a manager, support my female peers and team members best?
I think there were some great suggestions that were already here, and I guess the question would be, how do you want to support them? Do you want them to be able to be their full, I love the full authentic selves that Susan mentioned there. Do you want to make sure that you're not inadvertently editing them from being able to be present? And I always start with awareness. It is so hard to take that 20 seconds that is recommended before you open your mouth and actually think about what you're going to say, especially in a fast-moving company like ours is, and just make sure that whatever you're asking or doing, it's not something. It seems like it's reasonable. It seems like it's the same thing that you would ask. Real easy things. Am I always kind of talking to the same people? Is there? I think it was Susan or Christina who was just like, call somebody out and ask, what do you think? Yeah, Susan, that was your great example. There were so many great examples that were given here. We otherwise just do overload, whereas brevity maybe is the soul of wit to get to action.
Yeah, exactly. There are several pieces of advice that would serve anyone well in that area. Those are some included. And I think as an IC myself, if you're ever unsure, a great starting point is to ask how best to support them, because there are various individual needs as well. So great starting point if you're ever unsure. This one is, I guess, Vess was eager to answer this one. So I imagine you might have a good example here, Vess, but this one's from me. What is the least helpful advice that you've ever been given in relation to leadership, and why?
Yeah, that's it's a funny one, because this one, it took me back again, like many, many years ago, where somebody said to me, this was about a reporter I used to have. She was very, very eager, no, I want to be senior, you have to promote me. And of course, there's a certain way to do that, appropriately. But and then plus one, manager, again, female manager, said, but you know what, if it wasn't easy for you, why should it make it easy for other people to advance and to be recognized and to be celebrated and all that stuff? And I thought that was just so short-sighted and just so almost borderline evil. I was like, if, yes, it has been hard, but, I don't think my job is to just make it harder on other people. That should not be the point. So yeah, I think especially when it comes to, like women helping other women, I think notoriously there was, research done many, many years ago again, where, women at least were taught to put down other women. And I've had a chance to meet Madeleine Albright when I was in college. She's probably one of the most, phenomenal, leaders I've ever met. And she used to say that there is a special place in hell reserved for women who don't help other women. And it's just one of those things that stuck with me. It's like, regardless of what's happened to you before, just break the cycle. You have the responsibility to not pay it forward when it has been, painful or difficult or, anything like this. So I would flip it and say, make it easier and celebrate, other people and other women, regardless of what happens. So, yeah.
Love that. Love that. Maybe you should get that person in touch with Susan to talk some more about empowerment. But yeah, that's a fairly common thing, I think, sometimes. So yeah, definitely unhelpful advice, I think. Then we have one which I think Mamie might be good for you to take this one, because you've just come from a larger organization very recently. And this one is from Amit. He wants to know, how has your leadership experience differed within startups like Theydo or elsewhere versus larger organizations? Any unique benefits or challenges between the two?
Yeah, well, so I guess the way that I can kind of respond to this is more of the, when I was at Miro previously, I was a lead of like a problem space. And so managing a lot of various, responsible for a lot of problem spaces without being responsible for the actual people. And one thing I think maybe that I can touch on, the differences of that is between like being a project lead versus maybe a people lead, is just that the incentives have shifted. When you are leading a problem space, leading a project and responsible for that work, the trade-offs that you're making don't deal with people, right? When you are a people lead and you're there supporting your team, the decisions and trade-offs you make can have really lasting impact on the individuals that are behind those problems. And I think that is like, I think for me, one of the things that I've recognized is that, my responsibilities is with real human beings and their ability to feel empowered in their roles and supported and get the resources that they need. And so it's no longer about which feature do we start with first, but it's more around like, how do we unblock this person from something they're struggling with, or reconcile a relationship that they're having with a peer that is causing kind of a lot of stress and anxiety in their day-to-day. I think at the organizational level of support, one of the biggest shifts I would say is that there's more that you can impact in a smaller company. As everyone at Theydo knows, there's so much work to do. There's so many different ways that you can contribute, and your net of or your scope of what you can actually lead in can be very different than in a larger organization, where there are a lot of people. There are also a lot of people that are brought in to focus on very specific problems. And so kind of your reach is a little bit smaller in that way. But at the end of the day, even though I haven't, managed and led in a larger organization, like the people are the same. And so maybe kind of the things outside of, the day-to-day management might shift, but you're still there to support those around you.
Nice. Proper people-centric people leadership, Mamie. Love to see it. And then this one, perhaps Susan, I don't know whether you have or not, but maybe this question would be a good one for you. Have you ever experienced any gender-related microaggressions? And is there any particular way that you'd recommend dealing with that?
Honestly, I don't think that I have, that I can think of right now. So yeah, so I don't know that. Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of a specific example, which I'd rather give it on a specific example. Yeah, so.
Nice. Any of the other panelists experienced anything like that? It's maybe a more niche one to get into as well. I think we've covered some of them off, to be fair. Although some of the stories that we've heard are more just straight up aggressions than microaggressions. So it's hard to differentiate. But I suppose one of the common themes that I've got out of this panel talk is that honest, transparent, and constructive communication is generally the way to go about resolving any challenge that you're facing in this area. And I would say the same should most certainly be applied in these experiences as well. I think also it's often hard to notice if you're experiencing some kind of microaggression, because unfortunately women are fairly used to it as well, and kind of just crack on and carry on with what they were doing. So an interesting one to think about moving forward. And yeah, maybe we'll circle back to that one in a future, in the next Women in Leadership panel. And then we have one final question, which I will hand over to Christina. And this one is from Matt. What advice would you give to anyone who'd like to move into a leadership role in the future? Women, men, anybody?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe the first thing to kind of figure out is that, do you want to be a leader in terms of people leader? Do you want to lead people and teams? Do you enjoy that? Or do you want to be a thought leader and kind of a function owner? So you can be leader in kind of different ways. That's one thing. The other thing is that I think that's a little bit of like a lazy answer, but the same things that I covered in the
Oh, did we lose Christina, or is it just me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just lost. Anyway, so some of the things that I covered in my previous kind of section, that is like, why do you want to be a leader, and why are you qualified a leader? And when you move into that leadership role, kind of try to keep that consistency, right? And I think an important thing here to know as well is, like, if you really want the leadership position, get your why straight and then ask. I think you'll never get things if you don't ask for them. So just point blank ask, and ask for guidance how to move there.
Awesome. Nice. A very specific answer, which I'm sure could not steer you too wrong at all. So thank you very much. And with that, we are at time. So I'll leave you with this little quote, which luckily for me is something that we've discussed a fair bit today, about, unblocking your own way and then hopefully feeling obliged to do exactly the same for others. I think is a really nice ethos to live by. So massive thank you, especially to our panelists who put a lot of hard work and effort into their stories and what they shared today. Also, special shout out to our guest, Christina. It was really awesome of you to join, and we're looking forward to meeting you properly soon. And also big thanks to everybody for coming. Much appreciated, especially those who have come along as allies as well. I hope everybody learned something and enjoyed it as much as I did. Yeah, more to come on this soon. So thanks a lot, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.
Wait, Robin, I just wanted to give you a shout out for organizing this panel and to, spending the time to gather questions and structure this. There's a lot of